Do you feel it, that tightness in your chest? The sudden weight pressing down, even when nothing's wrong. Your thoughts start racing. Your breath shortens. It's like running from a ghost you can't name. And, worst of all, no one around you truly sees it. You smile. You say, "I'm fine." But inside, you're screaming, and no one hears. Now pause for a moment. What if anxiety isn't the problem? What if it's not a malfunction, but a message? Carl Jung, one of the deepest minds in psychology, believed that anxiety was never random. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't failure. It was the soul's way of speaking, a language most never learned, because no one ever taught them how to listen. Anxiety is not chaos. It's a code. It's trying to wake you up, but to hear what it's saying, you have to stop running. If you've ever wondered why anxiety feels like it has its own intelligence, its own message, that you can't quite decode, then you've found the right place. Subscribe now, because what you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you see anxiety. Not as an enemy to fight, but as a messenger from your deepest self. It's been labeled a disorder, a malfunction, a chemical imbalance to be managed or silenced. But Carl Jung saw it differently. To him, anxiety wasn't a sign of weakness. It wasn't a failure of the mind. It was a signal, a symbolic cry from the depths of your psyche. Jung believed that psychological symptoms, especially anxiety, were not meaningless disruptions. They were meaningful expressions, clues from the unconscious, urging us to confront something we've avoided for far too long. He once said, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." What did he mean by that? He meant that anxiety often arises not because something is wrong with us, but because we are refusing to face something that is real, something painful, something essential. Instead of allowing ourselves to move through that legitimate suffering, to grieve, to feel, to process, we suppress it. We push it down. We try to outthink it, distract from it, or rationalize it away. And in doing so, we create something else, a tension, a fracture. And from that fracture, anxiety is born. In our modern world, this refusal to suffer consciously is everywhere. We live in a culture obsessed with avoidance. We chase positivity at all costs. We're told to focus only on the good, to stay high vibe, to reframe everything as a blessing. But here's the paradox. The more you resist what hurts, the more power it gains. And when suppressed too long, it erupts in the only language it knows: panic, tension, unrest. Jung didn't see anxiety as a random occurrence. He saw it as a consequence of disconnection, a warning light flashing on the dashboard of your soul. It tells you that something vital has been lost or denied, a truth ignored, a need unmet, a part of yourself banished to the back of your mind. Imagine your inner world like a sealed glass jar. Now, Imagine placing a flame inside that jar, a flame that represents your authentic feelings, your instincts, your soul's truth. If that flame is denied oxygen, if it's suffocated by perfectionism, repression, or the need to be liked, what happens? It doesn't just go out. It builds pressure. It destabilizes the container. And eventually, it erupts. That eruption is anxiety. It's not a malfunction. It's your system trying to restore internal balance. Surface-level thinking can't reach this depth. You can't think positively your way out of existential unrest. You can't fix a spiritual fracture with to-do lists or daily affirmations. What's needed is honesty. A willingness to stop running from your discomfort and start listening to it. Because anxiety, at its root, is the tension between the self you've constructed and the truth you've ignored. If anxiety is a message, then we have to ask, who's sending it? Carl Jung believed much of our inner conflict comes from a part of the psyche most people spend their entire lives avoiding. He called it the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It's not a flaw. It's everything inside you that's been pushed aside. Every thought you were told not to think. Every feeling you were taught to hide. Every instinct you've silenced to survive. From a young age, you were taught to be likable, to be good, to be easy to love. You learned which parts of yourself were acceptable and which parts were not. So you smiled when you wanted to scream. You were polite when you felt rage. You acted strong when you were falling apart. And over time, you built a mask, what Jung called the persona. But here's the truth. Everything you exile becomes the ghost haunting your calm. Jung understood this well. What we repress doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It becomes shadow. And the longer it stays unacknowledged, the more pressure it builds. Eventually, it has to speak. And one of the ways it does is anxiety. Anxiety is not always irrational. Sometimes, it's the most honest part of you. It's the signal that your true self has been silenced for too long. That the gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be has grown too wide. In today's world, the pressure is worse than ever. We live through screens. We edit ourselves into digital versions we can barely recognize. We perform nonstop. And slowly, the distance between our outer image and inner truth becomes unbearable. Anxiety grows in that gap. You're not anxious because you're broken. You're anxious because your soul is exhausted from the performance. There's more. When you ignore your shadow, it doesn't stay quiet. It starts showing up in the world around you. You'll begin to notice. You judge others more harshly. You criticize what you see in them, but what you're really reacting to is what you refuse to see in yourself. This is what Jung called shadow projection. The shadow becomes a distorted mirror. You reject others not because they're different, but because they reflect back the parts of you haven't made peace with. And so, anxiety builds, overreactions, panic over small things, self-sabotage. When things are going well, it's not failure. It's your shadow demanding to be seen, to be heard, to be reintegrated. Jung once said, "No one becomes whole by imagining light, but by making the darkness conscious." That is the work. Not destroying the shadow, but turning toward it with honesty, with curiosity, with compassion. Because what you fear in yourself may actually be the part that can lead you home. The connection between your shadow and your anxiety runs deeper than most people realize. If you're beginning to see how the parts of yourself you've rejected might be speaking through your symptoms, subscribe and turn on notifications. What comes next reveals how your body becomes the translator for messages your mind refuses to hear. Anxiety does not begin in the mind. It begins in the body. Before it becomes a thought, before it spirals into worry or panic, your body already knows. Tight shoulders, a clenched jaw, a burning chest, a twisting sensation in your stomach, a lump in your throat that won't let your truth rise. These are not random symptoms. They are messages, encoded signals from the unconscious, transmitted through the nervous system. Jung believed the body was a mirror of the psyche. When the unconscious cannot find symbolic expression in dreams, in language, in art, it expresses itself literally through the flesh. Anxiety, then, is not just psychological. It is somatic. It is your soul speaking through the body when the mind refuses to listen. Think of your body as a stage, and the unconscious as the playwright. Every tremor, every ache, every sudden wave of fear, these are performances, not of drama, but of meaning. Meaning that hasn't yet been named. Modern science now echoes what Jung intuited. Polyvagal theory, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, teaches us that the nervous system is not just reactive, it's deeply relational. When we feel safe, our system opens. When we feel threatened, even unconsciously, the system shuts down, tightens, braces for impact. This is why you can feel like you're in danger, even when nothing is happening. Your body remembers what your conscious mind has forgotten. It reacts not to logic, but to patterns stored deep within the nervous system. Trauma doesn't live in memory. It lives in muscle. And when those old patterns get triggered, your body goes into survival mode. You become hyper alert, yet disconnected. You may call it overthinking, but really, it's your nervous system sounding the alarm. And this is why surface-level solutions so often fail. Deep breathing, cold showers, distraction technique. They may soothe the surface, but they don't reach the root. Because the problem is not that your body is broken. The problem is that your body is speaking on behalf of a soul that has been silenced. And the language it speaks is sensation. Pain is not dysfunction. It is direction. It is information. It is communication. And most of all, it is a call for reconnection. Jung understood that if we do not allow the soul to speak through symbol, it will scream through the body. That scream may come as insomnia, aspannitz, as exhaustion that no amount of rest can fix. Your body is not betraying you. It is protecting you by telling the truth. And behind every symptom is a story that's never been told, a feeling that was never allowed, a need that was never met, a truth that was never spoken. You are not exhausted because you're weak. You are exhausted because your soul has been fighting for years to be heard through a system that's been taught to stay silent. Once anxiety has spoken, once the body has signaled that something deeper is calling, the next question becomes, what now? For Jung, the answer was clear. You must begin the journey of individuation, not healing in the superficial sense, but transformation at the deepest level. This is not about becoming someone new. It is about reclaiming what you've abandoned. Individuation is the process of becoming whole. It is the integration of everything you are, not just the polished surface, but the forgotten depths. It is the path of returning to yourself. And this path is rarely gentle, because it asks you to confront what you've hidden. It asks you to feel what you've numbed. It asks you to stop pretending. Individuation begins when you no longer ask, what do others need me to be? And instead ask, who am I? Really? You cannot think your way to this answer. You must descend into the forgotten places. The shame, the fear, the stories you buried under busyness, productivity, or forced positivity. And when you finally stop resisting, something begins to shift. The anxiety that once felt like an enemy suddenly becomes a guide. It starts pointing toward what is real, what is unmet, what is possible. This is not a linear path. It's a spiral, a return again and again to the parts of you that long to be remembered. Jung described individuation as an inner marriage, a sacred union between opposing forces within the psyche, the masculine and the feminine, the instinct and the intellect, the light and the shadow. You might begin to notice signs, vivid dreams, repeating symbols, strange synchronicities that seem to pull you towards something meaningful. These are not coincidences. They are psychic breadcrumbs, clues from the unconscious, guiding you back to yourself. And the more you follow them, the more the anxiety begins to shift. It softens, not because it has disappeared, but because it has been heard. Sometimes, this shift is quiet, a moment of clarity, a breath that feels easier, a conversation where, for once, you don't pretend. Sometimes, it's dramatic. You feel the mask crack. The job, the image, the story no longer fit your soul. And it's terrifying, but it's also honest. Let me give you an example. Someone who spent years chasing perfection, always appearing confident, always in control, finally allows themselves to admit they are tired. Not weak, not broken, just human. And in that moment of honesty, something breaks open. The weight lifts, not because life is easier, but because the mask is gone. Individuation is not a destination. It is a lifelong unfolding, and anxiety is not a detour. It is the compass. It shows you where you've been divided, where you've compromised your truth, where a part of you is waiting to return. To individuate is to stop running and start remembering. It is to re-inhabit your own life, fully, truthfully, and without apology. There comes a moment on the inner path when thinking is no longer enough. The mind has tried to analyze, explain, and control, but the soul doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in silence, in symbols, in solitude. This silence is not emptiness. It is presence, a space where the deeper voice finally begins to rise. In Jungian psychology, silence is not passive. It's active. It's where the unconscious begins to form shape, sound, and meaning, just beneath the surface of awareness. And it only rises when the world is quiet. That's why solitude isn't just helpful. It's sacred. Not loneliness, but a chosen separation. A return to the room within, because it's there. In that inner chamber, that the soul begins to speak again. And how does it speak? Through symbols. Symbols are not decorations. They are the soul's riddles, wrapped in image, scent, and dream. A lion in your dream, a broken staircase, a door that never opens. These are not accidents. They are the language of the self, and they are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be listened to. Jung called this process active imagination. You don't run from the image. You sit with it. You let it move. You let it become. You write it down. You draw it. You speak to it in your journal. Not to fix, but to witness. Not to decode, but to allow. This practice slowly teaches the mind to become a witness. Instead of a judge, the symbol becomes a guide, a companion. It leads you into the deeper layers of who you are. And over time, you begin to change. Not because you forced change, but because something inside has been seen. Here's one way to begin. Write your dreams. Not just what happened, but how they felt. Give them a name. Sketch a single image and return to them later. With silence. Because the unconscious doesn't speak in straight lines. It speaks in echoes, in atmospheres, in moods. And if you stay with a symbol long enough, it will begin to shift. It won't give you an answer. It will change the question. This is where solitude becomes essential. It's not exile. It's a ritual. It is the sacred space where the healing begins. Picture it like this: a candlelit room deep inside you. No noise, no expectation, just you and the forgotten parts of your soul, waiting to be heard. And in that room, even anxiety becomes something else. Not an enemy, but a message. As one Jungian once said, you don't kill anxiety. You translate its poetry. This is the work. Not to escape your shadow, but to sit with it. Not to silence your wounds, but to let them become your teachers. Because when you finally meet yourself fully, in silence, in symbol, in solitude, you don't just feel better, you remember who you truly are. Anxiety is not your fault, and it is not your enemy. It is the strict professor of the soul, not here to punish you, but to test your willingness to grow. It doesn't whisper. It insists, because it carries a message that only you can decode. Most people run. They numb. They distract. But you're being given a choice, not to escape it, but to listen differently. Not, how do I get rid of this? But rather, what is this trying to teach me? That question changes everything, because it shifts the story from victim to translator. You're not broken. You're being called inward. If this exploration of anxiety as a sacred messenger rather than an enemy to fight resonates with your own experience, then you understand why diving deeper into Jungian psychology matters. Subscribe to this channel for more insights into the unconscious patterns that shape your life. Each video reveals another layer of what it truly means to translate the poetry of your symptoms and reclaim your authentic self. So here is the real work: not to suppress your signals, but to start interpreting them. Write your dreams, not just the scenes, but the emotional undercurrent. Notice what symbols repeat. A door that won't open. A hand reaching out. The same place. Again and again. These are not accidents. They are invitations. And the more you return to them, with presence and curiosity, the more they reveal. This isn't a one-time revelation. It's a path, a practice, a return. Change isn't revelation. It's ritual, a slow remembering of what you forgot you already knew. And it begins when you stop fighting your symptoms and start translating their poetry. So say it out loud. Not for me. For you, I choose to look within, because you've already heard the message. Now the question is, will you walk into it? The journey doesn't end here. It begins when you stop running and start listening to the wisdom your anxiety has been trying to share all along.